It's not just sheer luck. We understand how to build a business, how to make smart financial decisions.
At what point did you realize that this could become the thing? How did it go from a one-time project to the scale that you have?
Smart move is always to pay off the highest debt first. That always makes it the highest interest rate. Always go after that if you can, even if it's smaller.
Have you considered new build, new constructions? Is that part of the vision you are working on?
You might not choose to go with the how because it costs you too much, either in money and time, but there's always a way to do something if you're motivated enough. You just have to dig in and learn how to do it and commit.
All right. Welcome everyone to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring together what we think are two sides of the same coin, real estate and hospitality. And today I'm very excited to be here with Kerri Gibson, CEO and co-founder at Chalets, Hygge, which I would like you to, first of all, thank you, Kerri, for being here. Thank you for taking the time. But yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about, first of all, that name? Where does that name come from?
Oh, it's the biggest question I get. But first, thank you, Sebastian, so much for having me on the podcast. I'm super excited, especially since we're not very far apart in distance. We're about an hour and a half
Absolutely.
apart. But yeah, Hygge. So it is probably the biggest question I get about our business. And all it is the concept of enjoying the moments and finding the happiness in small moments surrounded by the things you love and the people that you love. So yeah, so it's a Danish word, it's Scandinavian, and it's really a Scandinavian lifestyle because when you're surrounded by so much winter and cold, it's focusing on the things that bring you joy and contentment. And so maybe it's a cup of coffee with your best friend in front of the fireplace, or in the summer, maybe it's, a barbecue under the stars with your family, whatever it may be, but just fully immersing yourself in that moment with the things and the people that bring you happiness.
Love it. And that's my cup of coffee every morning. That's my hygge, That's
Yeah,
that's what I
exactly. That's
enjoy.
exactly it. Like Hygge is personal to everybody. So it's up to you to
Love it.
define when you just feel that moment of internal peace and tranquility and joy and just can breathe for a minute.
That's amazing, Kerri. Well, and Kerri, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Just give us some background on how you got into hospitality. You're from Florida. What are you doing up in Canada? Just yeah, tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So, yeah, I am originally a Floridian living in Montreal by way of North Carolina. I had to stop over there for a number of years. But I ended up here for, the Gen X date matching app of The Office because we all worked way too much in the 90s and early 2000s. So, yeah, I met and married a adorable French Canadian. Moved up here because I was always up for the adventure to try something out. Why not? And fell in love with Quebec, honestly. And so it brought me so much joie de vivre, to use a French expression. And after moving here for 2 years, I was still working for my company in the US, the corporation I worked for in the US, which I had had a very successful career in tax and accounting technology. And there were parts of it that I loved, but it was also just a 24/7 job, like most people who work in tech and work for large corporations. And I had a burnout. And burnout is hard to explain to someone that doesn't have it because often even I had heard and I was like, yeah, just like mental tough up. And you can't do that. Like your mind, body, and soul just literally come to a breaking point where you feel like you're just in a black hole. So I decided to take a year off, um, not knowing what I was going to do, but knowing that I needed to rebalance my life, whatever that would look like. The first thing I did was go to France for 3 months to learn French. Living in Quebec now, I needed to have at least a baseline conversational capability in French. So that was how I invested in myself. And when I came back, my partner and I, Philip, we bought a house to flip as a project to kind of keep me occupied. It was something we had talked about for a few years as kind of like a fantasy fun project, right? Everybody watches way too much HGTV these days. And so we had a fun idea of doing that. And we had the opportunity with me being off of work, and a house in our neighborhood came up for sale. Um, so we bought it, and the intention was just to flip it. And for the next 9 months, I worked side by side with a contractor. In the end, I had fallen in love with the house and didn't want to let it go. And it was actually zoned for short term rental. And during this, I had met Danny Papineau, who you also know, the founder of We Chalet, which is a booking platform based out of Quebec. And he really opened up my eyes to what short-term rental was and the opportunities that it provided. So yeah, I turned that property into a short-term rental. And the very long story short is I just kept going. And 7 years later, here we are. We're 7 properties in that we have bought and fully renovated head to toe, flipped into short-term rentals. And yeah, we are continuing on. And my partner, Philip, he was able to join me in 2020 full time.
Mm.
Um, and we like to say that we traded money for happiness. Definitely the cash flow is a bit lower, but we have found that when you found your passion and you are happy, you need a whole lot less money.
Right. No, and so you guys are owner operators. That's amazing. And got into the short-term rental world. It seems like, by accident. I mean, the purpose originally was to flip this property, and you realize it's zoned, for short-term rentals, for accommodations, and you sort of give that a try. Uh, at what point did you sort of realize that this could become the thing that, like, I mean, your partner husband ended up, as you said, and leaving his W-2, right? And you as well, you're living from this investments.
Mhm.
When did you realize that this could be the thing? And how did it go from sort of a one time project to the scale that you have been able to obtain in terms of adding more properties to your portfolio?
Oh yeah, such a good question, because so many people often do say, how in the world do are you able to live off of just, we have 6 rental properties, the seventh one we ended up moving into, and so we live here now full time. Um, you know, when we started and realized we actually had a knack for renovation, and we were creating something that people actually loved and enjoyed, and I became more and more that I didn't want to go back to corporate. And I have an amazing partner, and so he was like, okay, what can we do to do something with this, and he still had a good paying corporate job. And so we looked at it as, for now, I was going to be working on building our future while he was taking
Mhm.
care of our present. So that's kind of how we looked at it from a division of responsibility for the household is, I was building assets and equity for something that would lead us towards, more financial stability, more financial freedom in the future, even though it wasn't cash flowing at the time. Um, so we were very fortunate in the regards to be able to do that. So like I said, we really got started in 2019, and then COVID happened. Um, and everything was shut down for a while. And during this time, my partner had also decided that, like, he was burned out from his job and he was just going to take a sabbatical. Um, so while we were closed down during COVID, I'll admit it gave me a few panics. He had left his W-2 job, and the chalets were set up. So I was really worried long term, but he and I started working side by side to renovate these houses on our own. And he's always had a handy streak. And so we figured out that while our timeline might expand, that we actually saved a lot of money in doing this together side by side, with taking out of it the cost of contractors, right? The cost of labor. That
Mm.
was a huge savings. Um, and then once we opened back up in COVID, the chalet market exploded up here
Mm.
in Quebec and in Canada. The borders were shut down. We couldn't travel. Everyone was doing staycations. And so in order to just keep up with the pace of everything going on, there was no need for him to go back to work at that time, to go back to a W-2 job. It was me, him, and then we have one full-time employee, Shauna, who was, at the time she was, doing all the cleaning. She's now our chalet operations manager. But so it was taking all three of us just to meet the demands for these chalets during that high time. And also what we did during that time is I took the time to like really double down on our direct book strategy and our website. So I guess you could say a little bit that COVID was a good charm for us, but it was able to skyrocket, like really give us, because we were so full, a nice little cash savings reserve because the reservations were coming in so not
Mhm.
high, the ADRs were high. Um, that yeah, in while we were doing that, and I was also working on building the brand, when was all said and done, our lifestyle had completely changed. Like we got in the habit of spending less money because of COVID. We weren't going places. We built a brand that became recognizable. We have like 30% return guests. So we kind of like took advantage of COVID in a good way that allowed us to actually create a small boutique business that cash flows. Um,
Mm.
doesn't cash flow to replace, I'm going to be very clear, it does not cash flow to replace our W-2 jobs, but it cash flows to provide us a very good life to do the things we still in love to do,
Mhm.
which includes traveling, spending time with family and friends. But yeah, no, we took a long, hard look and we just repositioned our finances to make it happen.
That's very interesting, and it's that trade off that you were talking about of like maybe in a way, making some adjustments in terms of the budget, right, of the household, minor adjustments, but the upside is the happiness component that you were saying that came from you doing something that you're passionate about, and on your own essentially. So tell us a little bit
I
more
just
about.
want to
Yeah, go ahead.
insert really quickly there. Like the part of our budget that changed when you said that sparked something in me. The part of our budget that really changed the most was the consumerism, the buying of things that
Yeah,
you don't really
that
need.
you don't need
You
exactly.
don't need, like, I've really come to understand that consumerism of the things when we just have excess money or we have unhappiness, things that we buy. But it's really what's changed. Like you said, it's not the important things, it's the consumerism that's gone away.
Mm.
The need, we have less need for things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And
And,
that's, you can be making whatever amount of money, and a lot of money, and to your point, be unhappy, and then I think if you can make money enough to sort of cover your needs, and live a comfortable lifestyle, but you can do that by doing something that doesn't feel like work, or that you enjoy. I mean, that's a change, that's a trade-off that it's a no-brainer, right? It's
yep.
a no-brainer. I mean, and I think a lot of people, you know are in this trap of sort of chasing the career and the status, and the money, and sort of just money for its own sake. I mean, there's a study that was done that showed that, you know I think I can't remember what the exact numbers were, but it was something around like going from, I think, 60 grand a year to like 100. The increase in sort of quote unquote happiness that you get from that, in order for you to experience that again, you would need to go from like 100 to like 250, like something ridiculous in terms of the delta there. It just goes to say that past a certain point, more money will not bring more happiness, more income will not bring more happiness. But unless you take that step back and question sort of the route your life is taking, then it's very hard to escape that, rat race, right?
Yes, the very narrow societal definition of what success is, and I did go down that hole and I did not that, and I had a very successful career, and I'm not going to say it was all bad. Like my corporate background allowed me to build this business. I understood the structures of how to build a small business, right? It's not just sheer luck that we're also successful off of,
Hmm.
such a small boutique business. We understand how to build a business, how to budget, how to make smart financial decisions. But my body and my mind forced me to take that step back from what society's definition said success was, and realize it was leading me to a place of deep unhappiness. And for some people, that works. But for many, many people, we've never stopped to ask ourselves, what makes me happy? Like, what truly? Because to say that, when I was growing up, my parents would always say, doing something you're passionate about is not going to pay the bills. And that's simply not true. If more people did what they were passionate about and
Hmm.
redefined, the need to have a bigger house, a nicer car, more money, an expensive, whatever
Hmm.
it may be, that, I think the world, the world would be a whole lot. A much happier place when people were pursuing their passions, because when you pursue
Hmm.
your passion, you put such a level of energy and love into it, and it just rises that to the top for everybody else
Hmm.
that's experiencing it.
Yeah. And also, I mean, to be practical too, I mean, there's always going to be elements of whatever you do that are not going to be like exciting, right? Like there's always going to be something that has to be done that is not easy, that it's hard, and managing a short-term rental portfolio is not the exception, right? Dealing with contractors, renovations, I mean, but at least you're passionate about the broader project you're working on. You're passionate about, I guess, the vision. You're passionate about it being your business, right? Your project. So I'm just saying this because I think there's also you know an extreme that might be dangerous in terms of saying, oh, let's follow our passions, and then there might be passions out there where supply of people with passion for those sort of trades exceeds the demand that there is for them.
Yes.
And when that's the case, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, that might be your passion. And yes, the 1% of I don't know, singers are gonna make a living, are gonna make a decent living. But what about the other 99%? Are and so I think there's a balance to be made, in terms of making a difference between being passionate about sort of absolutely everything that the work entails versus being passionate about at least the project as a whole. And in your case, I guess the good thing is you found a passion that also makes money, right?
No, and you're
In a
very
way.
right on that, right? Because I'm also passionate about cycling, right? I love cycling. I'm never going to be in the Tour de France. I'm never, and I'm never going to be a professional cycler. I love it, right? So you're right. There does have to be the balance. And I actually did a presentation on this at the Vacation Rental Women's Summit last December in Nashville, where it was talking about, like, how did I move from corporate and find something I was so passionate about and turn it into something I could live off of?
Hmm.
And so it's not just looking at what you're passionate about, right? I know I'm passionate about biking, but I never had dreams that I was going to pay my bills with that. But it's more, when I stood back, and they asked me to speak on this, I'm like, oh, how do I explain this? So I, created this Venn diagram that showed, where you find your opportunity is when you start making sure you understand your goals, you understand your motivations, you understand your skill set. And where all of those come together is where you have your opportunity, because your skill set defines what you bring into the world, what you're able to do to make money. Like, so one thing for me, oh, and the other one is your core values. So there were four of them, your core values.
Mm.
Once you sit down and define all four of those, where they start to overlap is where kind of your magic sauce is for creating something amazing that you can bring into the world. That's not a hobby. That's not something you love to do, but
Hmm.
actually, is a career, is a job, is a, what, however you want to label it. Like, because for me, my core values are my number one core value is people. Like, I am a huge people person, making feel
Mm-hmm.
people included, being aware of, being empathetic, sympathetic, just aware of others around me and how something makes them feel. Part of one of my great skill sets is my ability to organize. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and my core value, my goals are to build something that makes me financially independent,
Mm-hmm.
and my motivations are why. One of them is to make my parents proud, to make myself proud. So when you start to look at all of these things, and it's not one or two things, create a list. And I spent months identifying those four things. And that's what led me down to the road. When I started to look at it, became very clear I was, very organized. I loved serving others. I had, it was something that was going to give me financial freedom and
Mm-hmm.
something that I could be proud of to bring into the world. So all of those things came together. And that's why I'm successful at hospitality. I don't think people outside of hospitality realize how hard of work it is. Like, I'm passionate. I love my job. I don't feel like I'm working, but it is hard work. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it is 7 days a week. Like you said, dealing with contractors, dealing with employees, dealing with guests who all have different expectations, creating a brand. It's a lot of work. But when you bring all of those things together, the magic is amazing. And that doesn't mean, like you said, it's all fun and easy. We have days where I'm like, after this, guess what? I'm going to stain 3 terraces, start working on staining 3 terraces because it's that season. Pressure washing, sanding, not my favorite thing to
uh,
do, but it's fun, it's necessary. And I know that I have to do it to provide a guest experience. And again, when I look at my budgeting and things I have to give up, I can't afford to pay someone $3,000 to do that right now. So I'm going to trade my time for doing that. And yeah,
mm-hmm. No, I love that
I don't know.
framework. So it's basically, you said, your goals. Then you had your skills. What was the other two?
Your motivations and whys
Motivations
and your core values. And I have a
and your
Venn
core
diagram I
values.
can share with you, Sebastian, if you wanted to attach it with anything. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Send it
it's
over. We'll
once I
put it on the
started
screen.
sharing that,
When
I will. Okay,
That's
so
awesome. That's awesome.
when yeah, I love it when
And I would
really
add, of
think.
course, the opportunity vehicle, right? Like the all of those four elements are sort of internal, right? It's the internal sort of combination, and then but don't worry, we'll put it on the screen when we do the editing here. And
Okay,
then
okay, okay.
there's
I
the
will.
there's the
Perfect.
external component. There's the external component of like the opportunity vehicle, right? So you want to find that combination that allows you to put all of those internal elements you just mentioned, motivations, skills, everything you just said, goals and core values. You want to make sure you find an opportunity vehicle that allows you to sort of put all of that in practice and excel. Now, let's talk a little bit about that opportunity vehicle of yours. So what was the timeline? What was the process of you going and adding more properties into the portfolio? What was sort of the strategy there? Was it a thing of like sort of adding one property at a time? Did you sort of refinance your first property and then use that to sort of buy your next, or was it all done? Like what was the sort of financial strategy for you to keep adding properties? Because it's a challenge sometimes when you put all of your savings or a big proportion of your sort of capital available into a down payment and some renovation costs for one property. It's like, okay, great, now this is up and running, but then that might not be enough to cover your lifestyle and your husband's lifestyle. So how do you actually scale this? How did you continue adding more and more properties?
So I'm going to be fully transparent here on all of this. So, because it's an excellent question, because people look at that and they say, I don't think I could ever achieve that because I can't buy 6, 7 properties. I don't have enough savings to do that. So I don't think on any other podcast or anyone I've talked to, I've been this transparent about how the finances worked on all of this. So if you'll bear with me, I can walk you through it a bit. But so when Philip and I got married, and we knew that we were going to be moving to one country or the other, and we both had very high paying jobs, but at that time we also made a joint decision to pay off as much personal debt as we could. And honestly, for me to move to Canada, that was much easier, making sure I had paid off all my student loan debt. I had paid off all my vehicle debts. I had no credit card debt. Credit card's less sticky, but some of these others, like when you're going to transfer your assets into another country, often the loan's not going to transfer with them. So we had to I had to aggressively work on paying off as much debt as I could in the form of bank loans.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Philip also, with his extra money, he focused on paying off the house that he was already living in. So when I moved here, we spent a few years being very intently focused on paying off all of our personal debt, or as much as we reasonably could. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that also, honestly, that's where started our discipline of less consumerism, because instead of just having that extra money just kind of hanging out, we started proactively putting into paying off debt.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time that my burnout came and I left my job, I had been living up here for 2 years. We had paid off every single bit of our personal debts, including our
Wow.
house, our cars. We had no credit card debt. And I had had some leftover student loan debts, from living in the US. So college educations are expensive. So
And
we
by the
had
way, parenthesis
absolute.
before you go on, like, what did you think for people that, let's say, might be trying to pay off their debts? Did you go with an approach of like paying, high interest rate the loans first? Or did you go with the approach of like going based on the size of the loan itself, trying to just get small wins by getting rid of the smaller loans and then tackling the largest ones? Was there any strategy though that you would recommend, in terms of paying off your debts?
So for me, the strategy was, because I was moving to another country and I was taking assets with me, was to pay off my debt that had assets tied to it, like specifically my car.
Oh, okay.
Credit
Right,
card
right, right.
debts, like they don't care where in the world you are. But before I could like transfer, my physical assets to Canada, there couldn't be any debt attached to them. But honestly, I mean, the smart move is always to pay off the highest debt first that you can. Um,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
so,
mm-hmm.
so I mean, that always makes it the highest interest rate. Like, always go after that if you
Sure.
can, even if it's smaller. Like, so for example, I could have paid off my student loan debt faster, but the interest rate on it was amazing. So it made more sense for me to focus on my credit card debt, even though I would have eliminated that student loan debt faster. The way my
Mm,
debt was structured, it made more sense to go after the credit card first. So I did do
okay.
that. So yeah, so my first one was assets tied to assets. I needed to move to Canada, then high interest rates, and then, anything remaining after that.
Okay.
Some small personal loans and things like that I had left over from my house, when I sold it, so yeah, that was my strategy. But if you have the option, I always say go after the highest interest rate that you can and start reducing
Mm-hmm.
that. So by the time I left my job, we had no personal debt, which made a huge difference in the ability to say, okay, we're going to go from two salaries to one salary, because because my burnout had been coming and we had been talking, like I was very transparent with my partner. He was very supportive of me leaving my job before I wanted to. So I would say something important is to make sure you're being clear with your partner and the other people that you live in a household with about where you're at, so that they can decide where
Mm-hmm.
on the spectrum that they support you. So yeah, deciding to go from two to one. And we had enough cash and savings that we were able to buy our first one just outright and pay for the
Mm-hmm.
renovation. Because what we do is we buy homes that are in terrible shape. Like
Okay.
they're really bad. They need a lot of, like, some of them, the only thing left when we're done is the slab of concrete because it's so bad. And we have to
Really?
basically rebuild from the ground up. So we get, you know, abandoned, like homes that need a lot of love. So the price point on them was very low. Renovation was high. So when I was first doing it myself, we weren't cash flowing. And my husband had a good enough job so that while we paid for the first one outright, the second one, we were able to do a mortgage on with 20% down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, um, and actually, we were able to do that on the next two houses after that, is chalets after that, because the price point was low. He had a good salary. We were able to do a 20% mortgage on, so we ended up having four personal mortgages that we were able to
Okay.
do. We had to work with the bank on that, but again, it was, because he had a high W-2 job at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if not, we would have used the option to do the BRR method, right? The buy, renovate, refinance,
Mm-hmm.
and pull
Mm-hmm.
money out to do it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how we were able to do the first ones. To be transparent, we are at the point now where we're refinancing our properties for our next acquisition. Um,
Okay, so you are in the
so
middle of that.
we are going to do that. We have high equity that we've built into it.
Right. The
So,
first one was bought, outright, cash. So that is
yes.
that the one you're refinancing?
Not yet, because it's not up for refinancing, because Canada mortgages work a little bit different than US, and that we have to renew our mortgage every 3 to 5 years, depending on the time
Yeah,
frame that you pick.
on the
And at
term.
that
Yeah.
time is the best time to refinance, because you don't have to like up your mortgage, because you don't have to do a new notary fee or attorney fee, closing fees and all of that. They do you have to pay for an appraisal, and then you're able to add up to 75% to the loan at that point. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
but I will say, there's so many financing options out there that are not traditional banks. And I would really encourage people to start checking into those. And I've really started educating myself about those more and more. You can get higher private loans, because there's so many people out there that want to invest in real estate, but don't have the time or the knowledge of how to do it. Or there's often people that own properties and they're willing to do seller financing. Those exist so much more than I thought they existed. But I traditional bank financing right now is the hardest and the most expensive. So educating yourself on non-traditional real estate funds is huge right now, and it's a huge opportunity.
And sort of like what are you looking at right now in the process you're going through of refinancing one of your properties in terms of, you know is it a personal loan that you're refinancing and getting, or have you sort of been able to get the bank to consider some of the historical revenue, in terms of SDR, historical performance? Because that's always tricky, right? Banks tend to
Yes.
not want to sort of consider that revenue because they see it as risky and volatile and whatnot. What's
Yep.
been your experience dealing with that in this process?
So we are actually in the process, as our mortgages come up for renewal, we're switching to another bank, because we've actually found a bank in Canada that is more bullish on short-term rentals, and they will
Really?
consider
Oh,
the
you got to
revenue
tell me
on it.
what bank it is. You got to tell me what bank it is.
I am happy to, and connect you with them, because they do consider financials on it. And so in our process of moving over, they've opened up for us over $2 million of money that the other banks won't give us, because they're looking at how we're cash flowing as a business.
Oh.
Other options to look at when I talk about non-traditional that people often overlook is government programs. They can have different grants and things for properties, for different types of properties. Like if you're looking at a commercial property, maybe you're buying something that's zoned commercial, or if you're looking at something that's in a district that they're trying to regenerate, or you're going to make it inaccessible, for people with disabilities. There are often government grants out there that can help you finance these things as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing that we have learned a lot about, is making sure you understand the government programs that are out there and available, because maybe you just need to tweak your business plan. Like one that's big right now, it's getting a lot of attention in both US and Canada, is accessibility for, people with disabilities, all the way from sensory disabilities to mobility disabilities, um, and having accommodations that can serve them. And there are so many grants out there that you can get to help turn a house into something, or property into accessible access for others. And yeah, it's actually it's a really cool thing right now. Lorraine Woodard with Rentable, who has
Mm-hmm.
multiple sclerosis, and it's been her vision and her mission to start creating more accessible vacation for people with disabilities because they often don't get to go on vacation. So it's kind of become a mission for me as now. And as I started learning about it, that's where I started finding, hey, there's all kinds of opportunities out there to
Hmm.
work with the governments to find these different grants or even maybe foundational grants that are going to help you and help finance some of these projects.
No, those are great. Those are great points. And quick. And what about like new constructions? Given that you do renovations that are massive, right? You were saying you buy properties that really need a lot of love, where most of the capital goes towards the renovation.
Mhm.
Uh, have you considered new build, new constructions? Is that part of the vision, part of the plans you are working on, or is that a different beast and not something you're looking into?
So another level of transparency. So, um, the short answer to that is anything is always on the table.
Hmm.
The emotional side of me says I really love rehabilitation of old properties, giving them a new life, where
Hmm.
there's the opportunity to do that. Just because it's hard to build history and soul into a house. But a house that's been there for a long time and has a story to
Hmm.
tell, you can capitalize on that and make it something that a new build just doesn't have the opportunity to provide. However, since we started investing, the market has changed so much. So when I was telling you our first house that we got for a really great deal today, so it was in 2017, 125,000 Canadian. And we put 75,000 into it renovating it. So $200,000 Canadian all in on that, which is going to be in the ballpark of 140, 150. Today that property, even in the bad the help me out. The poor situation it was in, at the time, it still would sell for 250, 300 now without
Hmm.
renovation, right? So the
Hmm.
market has changed so much. Um, that we have to look at it differently because for us it's not just the building of equity, because building equity is also is hugely important, but it also has to cash flow because this is our lifestyle now.
Hmm.
And so the more expensive a property gets, and with interest rates these days, it's harder and harder to cash flow
Yes.
on a single family home, right? So the finding a single family home that you can cash flow on in a short-term rental is going to be close to impossible in the market we're in these days. So we have to pivot. We have to look at something else. So right now and what's on the table is new build, um, boutique hotels,
Yeah.
creating more like an experience as opposed to, maybe something more like a glamping. But those are all options we're looking at right now because, in full transparency, short term rentals, because of the market and because of regulations that are happening, are really, really hard to cash flow right now. And if you're
Mm.
looking for something that's just an investment that you want to cash out in 20 years on the equity that someone else has paid the mortgage on, it's great. You can still go ahead and do that. We can't do that. It has to put money in our bank account. It has to be cash flowing after 18 months.
Okay, so that's what you're looking for. You're looking for cash flow in the next 18 months. And
Plus
let's talk a
long
little
term
bit about
equity. Like, how can
for
we put long
sure.
term equity into it? Yeah.
Yeah, but yes, and I guess yeah, that's the challenge now. It's making, finding properties that do cash flow, given the price points where the properties are at, the interest rates, and as you said, the regulatory environment, the risk that represents, all of that is tricky. Let's talk a little bit about boutique hotels. I know you did a mastermind on
Yes.
how to go about this. What are some of those sort of key takeaways that you got out of that mastermind that you've been able to apply in the process of looking for a boutique hotel? What's sort of unique about the process of buying a boutique
Mhm.
hotel versus a single family property that you would just you know rent as a short-term rental? What can you tell us about that experience?
Oh my goodness. So we have been in this mastermind. It's a year-long mastermind. We've been in it for 2 or 3 months now, somewhere in the 2 to 3 months. And I was hesitant because it was an investment for us to be able to do this. A large investment, like the largest investment I've made in my education since university. And so we didn't go into it lighthearted. We made sure we understand what it was going to bring to us, because commercial real estate and motels are a very different beast than residential single family homes. It's very different. And we had no real idea what that difference was. We are smart people. We would have figured it out. Like, we didn't know anything about short-term rentals and really real estate when we started. And we've built a very successful business by just digging in and doing the hard work to figure it out. Right. So we have no doubt we could figure it out. But why we decided to join the mastermind was because of the huge knowledge gaps we had. This could accelerate our time to market. It was going to fill the knowledge gaps. It was going to give us the tools that we needed that were already combined and pulled together from people who have done it successfully in the past. And that's why we decided to do it, because we decided the financial investment was going to get us to cash flowing much, much faster. That it was going to get us closer to identifying an opportunity, making sure it was a good opportunity, because you don't evaluate the same way you do off of residential real estate, and then that it was a good investment. And then through the whole process of due diligence and closing on it, which is completely different for banks or any financial institution. And then operations, because hotel operations are very different than short-term rental accommodations. So yeah, that's why we decided to join it. And there are a couple of masterminds that were out there, and we ended up selecting the one we did because, honestly, we just had a connection with the guy that leads it. Like, personality and connection are super, super important in something like this. And we got to meet some of the members of it ahead of time, and we just felt like it was a good, open group that wanted to share and help and support, you know?
Hmm.
So in the 3 months, that time, we have learned how to look where you look for hotels, because you don't just look for the good hotels. You don't just look on, the MLS or the Centrus. And if you're in Canada, because if it ends up there, it's probably already been through the hands of a lot of investors that have passed on it. So, you should approach it always with a sense of wariness when you see something on the MLS or on Centrus if you're in Canada.
So where are you prospecting? Let's start there. Where are you prospecting then for boutique hotels?
Sure. So there's LoopNet.
Okay.
And there is also one called CoStar. And CoStar is an expensive platform. LoopNet is free. It's where a lot of commercial properties happen, are put for sale, and it's free. But then to be able to run the stats behind it is access to a platform called CoStar, and that's extremely expensive. And that's another thing that we got out of this mastermind, is they buy a group membership. And so we
Oh
were able
wow.
to
Okay.
access all of that data without having to put it together ourselves. Because to run like a single CoStar report, I believe, is somewhere in the range of $5,000 to $6,000. So you don't want to run that on every single property, right?
Okay.
So
Okay.
you want to
Okay.
you only want to do it on ones you're serious about. Whereas if you can have access to that at the beginning, it'll tell you right away, good, bad, no, so you can move on.
Okay.
But
Okay.
yeah, so it taught
So
us
that's
how
the
to,
prospecting. Uh-huh.
that's
That's
the
prospecting.
prospecting.
Hmm.
Yep. And then there's the whole, when you're valuing commercial real estate, you're evaluating the net operating income. You're not evaluating the value of the land and the building itself.
Hmm.
It's so, which is one thing that's super different in short-term rental, is what we were talking about earlier, getting banks to recognize the income, because it's not commercial. They're often like, that's residential. So for the fact that we found a bank that actually says, no, it's residential, but operating as commercial, and they're willing to loan on that, it is kind of a unicorn of a bank to find. But so you don't look at, you're going to look at it to make sure that you're not paying, $2 million for something like this. So we looked at one hotel, they wanted $2 million for it. Well, when you look at all the reports and the valuations, and it's only worth 800,000, right? So that is a red flag, and their income was way down too. So it's got a balance, but the primary driver is how much revenue, how much net operating income it's delivering. So,
Mm-hmm.
so that's the
Mm-hmm.
next thing you're going to look at in that. And then when you go into do, that's one level of due diligence you're going to do. And then when you go into building inspections, it's far more in depth than it is in a residential. So we're about to go, and we are hopefully going to have a signed purchase offer on a motel today or Monday.
Oh,
We've been working
wow.
through that. So, yeah, and going through that, like we had to engage lawyers that are specialists in commercials so that they can read the contract. A broker, the seller's agent, is a commercial broker, not just a regular residential broker. So we negotiated with ahead of time, to come up with what were what was a good architecture of the deal for us and the owners. Their seller wrote it up, their broker wrote it up, then it has to go to our lawyers who are the commercial real estate, because the bank's going to want to make sure a commercial lawyer has looked for all the right elements in the contract. So
Mm-hmm.
once we have that, we'll go into things like building inspections, which is going to be a multi-day process because they go through
Mm-hmm.
everything on this building. Like, it's not just, yep, looks good, maybe this, that. They're going to inspect every single part of this building to look to see if there's anything all the way, from, you've got mass electrical systems, you've got, the tax on the utilities. They've got to make sure it can handle, it's really wired to handle the load on that. Nothing doesn't need to be updated. There are no hazards. There's no asbestos. It's a massive undertaking on something like that. Um, and then, to be honest with you, on due diligence, there's more steps, but that's the part we're learning right now as part of this
Yeah.
mastermind, because we would have been like, Chat GPT, okay, tell me the steps for due
Yeah. Yeah.
diligence.
Yeah. Well,
But it's actually in this mastermind, there is a folder with all of the tools and the checklists and everything that we need that we're learning right now that would have
that's
taken us
awesome.
months to put together. Like,
Yeah, no, it's the power
months.
of the network and leveraging other people's expertise. And I'm curious, what about the financing? Because when I've spoken with sort of brokers or people that have gone and bought, boutique hotels, what I've heard is the loan to values are also very different, in terms of the financing side of things, where you could be looking at loan to values of like 50% as
Mhm.
opposed to your traditional, 80% or so on the
Mhm.
residential side of things. How did you go about financing this deal?
Okay, so that is so true. So, like, a traditional bank will typically only finance 50% of a motel for a 10-year period. So it's pretty, and at the end of that 10-year period, there's usually a large balloon payment that's due. So unless you're just like wealthy or cash flowing, you have to find alternative financing, which is another thing that we learned in this mastermind. So there are ways to go about it. And one is fundraising, putting together an investment fund and getting private investors.
Mm-hmm.
And another way to do it is to look at non-traditional financing, like seller financing. And here's
Mm-hmm.
also where government programs come into play. So in the US, you have the SBA, the Small Business Administration, that will loan more aggressively on a loan than a bank will, because their goal is to keep small businesses open and thriving. Here in Quebec, we have a program called the PDAT, when you start researching it, and it's under Investissement Quebec, where they will loan you 50% of the value of the motel. It's a motel program, including renovations and any acquisition costs, at prime rate for 20 years. Okay, so that's digging around this. You have to dig around and do your work to find it. And after that, so that means we only have to come up with 50%. And that's where we're looking at maybe refinancing some of our properties, doing an investment fund with some of our friends that we know want to do. Like we mentioned, all we mentioned on social media was we're looking to do to a hotel. You would not believe the number of people on our networks that were like, I went in, I went in, I went in.
Mm.
So, being active on social has also set us up for success to do this, because people know what we're doing. They're interested. They followed along. And when we say we're ready to make a big move like that, all of a sudden people are wanting.
Yeah.
So we're not going to do much private on this one, because between the hotel is well priced. It's in great condition from everything we've seen so far. It looks like a good deal. We're able to do it ourselves between the PDAT and refinancing, and maybe a small loan from some friends, but it's not the first one. And
Nice.
so the
How many
next step,
doors? This one?
16, but we
That's
can transform it into
exciting.
17. So, and it's in Bay St.
Wow.
Paul in Charlevoix, one of the most beautiful areas of Quebec. So yeah, so the next time we will be setting up some type of investment fund, and that's one thing we have to learn about. Like US, our mastermind that we're part of, it's a US based one, so some of the things are
Yeah.
different, from a
Yeah, no,
financial
capital
perspective on how you can
raising is
structure
a
'em.
whole thing, here
Yes.
with the whole, well, the SEC equivalent here is a completely different
Yes.
beast, no public solicitation, a bunch of things. But
Yes.
that could be exactly, that could be an entire different chapter here, episode. Kerri, look, I think this has been great. I mean, believe me, I could keep you here for hours because there's been just so much, fun stuff we've covered. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Very inspiring, very educational. Where can people connect with you?
Oh my goodness, I would love to. And I am so sincere. In fact, when I say that if I can help anyone with any little tidbits like this, just scratches the surface of what we've experienced and just learned from just starting and doing it. That's what I would encourage your listeners on their doing it. Like the answer is never no, it's just how. And you
Mm,
might not choose to go with the how because it costs you too much, either in money and time and something, but there's always a way to do something if you're motivated enough. You just have to dig in and learn how to do it and commit.
mhm.
So, because anyone can do what we've done. Like, honestly, anyone can do what we've done if you're willing to put in the time and the work. So, if I can help anyone who's just starting the journey, curious about the journey, or ready to pivot, anything I can do, I'm so happy to help. People have been so helpful to me in this. So, they can find me. My personal, I'll send you all these as well if you want to put in the show notes, but my personal Instagram is at Kerri underscore reinvented. I reinvented my life. Um, and that's where I talk a little bit more, my personal life, of course, but I share like things I'm going through on the personal side about running my own business and making this change. And then our business Instagram is at Chalets underscore Uga for both Instagram and Facebook. And then our website, and I'm on LinkedIn both as Kerri Gibson, and we have a page on the Chalets Uga page. So, yeah,
That's
I'll send you all
amazing.
of
I
that
will
in
make
email
sure to
if you want
share
to.
those links. Yeah, we have it.
Yeah.
We'll make sure to put it out there. But yeah, thanks so much, Kerri, and I look forward to seeing you soon and learning more about the experience of once you've acquired this boutique hotel, everything that happens afterwards. Sounds super
Yeah.
exciting. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Sebastian.
All right, take care. See you soon.